Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Hey, everybody. Got a big Christmas week ahead of us this week. And it's just Morgan Streetman because Roxanne Wilder is out right now on maternity leave, and she's had her beautiful young baby daughter. Well, young, obviously. Fresh out, baby daughter. So,
she had a Christmas baby.
Aw. Now, this is some of my favorite Christmas music right there, Pat George. I'll tell you what, another Christmas baby is the Sarge. Got to call him this morning, wish him a happy birthday today. And, boy, we sure do miss having the Sarge around here. Used to be a lot of fun with him, doing shows with him. So, yeah, the good old days, as we like to say.
Well, you never know. I mean, Roxanne could call in today.
Well, that would be interesting. I highly doubt she's going to be worrying about the show today. But you never know. And it sure would be fun to do a retrospective. We were talking to Mason Dixon this morning. It'd be fun to get Mason back on for a cameo and talk about some of this impeachment stuff or some of the other news that we've got going on right now. I mean,
he promised in 2020.
He did. He sure did.
Make a little surprise appearance.
Well, we got so many things to talk about with that, with respect to the impeachment. You know, we could probably spend the whole show on impeachment. But I'll tell you, it's interesting to me what the Democrats are doing because they passed the 2 articles of impeachment, and now they don't want to actually send them over to the Senate.
I was going to ask you about that. Why is that?
Well, you know, there's a lot of theories out there. Most people are taking the theory that it's because they don't think that the impeachment will succeed in the Senate, and so they're putting off sending it over for one reason or another, so it doesn't just get blown out of the water. Now, I don't know if that's the reason because, you know...
That's a good reason. They just want to keep it going.
They want to drag it out,
yes.
and this is the impeached president, although, you know, there's some question constitutionally whether he has been impeached if they haven't actually transmitted the articles to the Senate. I mean, is that a true impeachment if they haven't passed it along for the Senate trial? Now, of course, the Senate trial will be presided over by Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, and the vote count will need to be 2/3 to actually move forward with convicting the president. It's funny that they use the conviction and trial language when they're saying, oh, this is just a political process. It's not a criminal process. And remember, the reason they want to say it's not a criminal process so they can get around the Sixth Amendment right to confront your accusers, the right to call witnesses in your defense. They want to get around that and say the president shouldn't have any of those rights. And, of course, during the House impeachment proceedings, which were a complete farce, frankly, they didn't give the president any of those rights. They never gave the minority party, the Republicans, the opportunity to call any witnesses or put on any evidence or frankly, really even do anything. It was a complete start-to-finish railroading. They had a conclusion in mind when they started, and of course this started, if you look at the news stories, they were talking about impeaching the president before he even took office.
Before he took the oath.
Before he took the oath of office. So this has been going on the entire time he's been president. And then, of course, you got the Democrats who now want to say that they're thoughtfully dealing with this, they're prayerfully dealing with this, they're really saddened by this. And, you know, I hope that the folks at home and maybe at work today, if anybody's working today, and I know some of us are, I hope that y'all don't fall for that because the Democrats sure do think that we're pretty stupid to buy that kind of nonsense, particularly when we see them at their Capitol Hill wine and cheese parties celebrating the impeachment. And there are photos of those that you can find on the web, although you're going to have to look for them because the mainstream media is absolutely 100% in their pockets. And so the mainstream media is not going to share with you any of that kind of information that would cause you to question the narrative that the media and the Democrats want you to buy into.
Is it strange for me to think, it was kind of weird, how did the pastors all of a sudden, right after that, come out and start, pull Trump out of office? Why was the timing on that right after the impeachment as far as the Democrats were concerned?
That's something that
how did that happen?
I saw that.
Yeah.
Christianity Today. It was one magazine, and I think it was the editor maybe of the magazine or the publisher who said that. I didn't dive into that real deeply. I did see it, And the thing is, if you notice that right after that, Franklin Graham, who's Billy Graham's son, came out and said, I've never shared this, and I wouldn't share it publicly except for that this statement was made in this magazine, this evangelical magazine, that Trump ought to be removed from office. And I just want to tell you, my dad, Billy Graham, voted for him in 2016 and believed that Trump was the right man at the right time for our country. So I thought that was a pretty interesting comeback. I mean, here's the thing. By and large, the evangelical community is strongly in support of President Trump.
That's what I thought.
Now, I don't think that means that they approve of all of his personal behavior. I think that, clearly.
I don't think a lot of us do.
That's right. But he's our president, and let's look at what he's accomplishing. And yes, he's a rough around the edges kind of New York kind of a guy, and that's his personality. But maybe that's the kind of person we need, because can you imagine someone else standing up to all this pressure over all this time?
Absolutely not.
I mean, I was never a huge fan of the president being such an egomaniac, but I'll tell you what, if he wasn't such an egomaniac, I think he would have stepped down and just said, you know what, I'm sorry, forget about it. I'll go back to enjoying my life instead of being under a constant assault, constantly being slandered by the media, etc. So
I thought the same. I told friends that. I said, I don't know why he doesn't just throw his arms up and say, I give up,
I couldn't.
I tried.
I don't think I could take it. I'll be honest with you. I don't think I could take it, but maybe that's why we needed such an egomaniac like he is, because he's not going to give it up. He's not going to just shirk away and go away quietly.
He is ripping and ready to do another 4 years.
In fact, they say he feeds on this stuff, and this sort of, gives him more energy for the fight when you're throwing punches at the president. Of course, we're using that idea figuratively, throwing punches, not
the only thing that scares
literally.
The only thing that scares me is the next 4 years. He did everything his way this 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The next 4 years, he could look at it and go, what do I got to lose? I could do anything.
Yeah, well.
So it's a little frightening what he could do.
Well,
nothing negative, but I mean just the things we'd hear.
Well, we'll see what happens, because I think the way it's going right now, I mean, somebody was asking me the other day, some friends of mine who live inside the Beltway, and they're kind of D.C. insiders, and they were asking me, what do you think the Democrats, who are they going to nominate, and then, who's going to actually be able to beat Trump, if anybody? And I said, well, of the slate of candidates or potential candidates that they've got right now, I don't see a single one who could beat Trump, period. Now, the only thing that I could see happening, and this has been talked about, is Hillary Clinton jumping back into the race. She just cannot get enough. She's a glutton for punishment, as we would say. She cannot get enough. And I don't know if you saw those pictures of her recently, but she's obviously had some work done, as we would say, some work done. She's got those rosy cheeks, and everything's very smooth, far too smooth for a lady of her extensive experience.
And, she thought she won last time, so she was close enough where she thinks this could just happen.
Well, that's what she'll say, right? I beat him before, I can beat him again, which is, of course, part of the nonsense and the narrative that the media enables. And you got people like Elizabeth Warren out there saying we're going to get rid of the Electoral College. Okay, well, you're going to have to change the Constitution to do that, because that is ensconced in the Constitution. And I don't know if you checked, but it isn't the easiest thing in the world to do, to change the Constitution.
Might take a while.
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy to do. Now, what's interesting is I hear all this, discussion and saying she won the popular vote. And that just kind of that kind of sticks in my craw, as I like to say. Because the truth is, there is no popular vote. That's not how we elect the president. We elect the president through the Electoral College. That's the vote. So the idea that, well, I won the popular vote, there is no popular vote. That's a nonsensical term that's used. But, all right, so let's just jump back to impeachment and talk about why might the Democrats have passed these articles of impeachment and then not transmitted them to the Senate for resolution. Well, what are the theories that I've seen out there? And this has some sense behind it, because this is obviously a plan. They had this plan ready to go ahead of time of how they were going to deal with this impeachment articles. And it comes from the Lawfare Group, which is a blog called Lawfare Blog. And it's a group of lawyers that participate in these discussions, and they've been involved on the Democrat side throughout the entirety of President Trump's administration. They were involved in the Kavanaugh hearings, David Bromwich, and they were involved representing Christine Blasey Ford and others. But this is Benjamin Witz, who's the friend of Jim Comey. This has all been discussed before. I don't know if you recognize these names. I know there's a lot in today's world that you got to try to remember. But the Lawfare Group has come up with this strategy, and there is a theory out there that seems to be potentially on point, that the reason that they're doing it is to try to gain some kind of advantage in some of the cases where they want to get things like former White House counsel Don McGahn to testify. We'll talk some more about that when we come back.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We were talking before the break a little bit about the impeachment and what's going on, with the Democrats in the House not sending the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. And I don't know if you saw Nancy Pelosi's press conference where she talked about why she wasn't sending it over, because she feels she can't be assured of a fair trial in the Senate. And once the Senate sets rules for the trial that she agrees with, that she believes will give a fair trial, then she'll send the articles over.
Well, it's been so fair up to this point. Why change anything?
Right.
Now?
I mean, it's been a total railroading up to this point. And I'm just amazed that Nancy Pelosi thinks that she's in a position to tell the Senate what to do. That's none of her business, frankly. That's for Mitch McConnell and 51 senators to decide on what the proper procedures will be for a trial. Now, there's a lot of commentators out there talking about this, including my good friend Ken Starr, who handled the Clinton impeachment as the independent counsel at that time. And, of course, he says that this is constitutionally completely wrong and that she's really overreaching and she's engaging essentially in an unconstitutional power grab. And there's a lot of other people who say that, including most legal scholars. I mean, Alan Dershowitz was out saying that, and plenty of other people are out saying that. And that is correct under the Constitution. So what do we think she might be doing? Well, we think that potentially they're holding this up. They're going to try to use these articles of impeachment to give them an advantage in the various court cases that are currently pending, where they're seeking to breach into executive privilege. So remember, they want to question former White House counsel Don McGahn, and the president has asserted executive privilege. I mean, hello, that's his counsel. But they want to get into the back and forth about what he talked about with his attorney. And, that's part of an ongoing court case. There are others as well, and they may want to use the pending articles of impeachment as additional ammunition in those cases to try to get access to further evidence. Because if you haven't noticed the pattern, this entire 3-year exercise that they've been going through has been all about getting something going, like the Mueller investigation. Okay, we just need some kind of a predicate for it. We need some kind of an arguable reason to start the investigation. And once we get the investigation going, then surely we're going to find something, right? I mean, that was the whole thing about looking into, the emails and the communications using the FISA warrant. The whole thing was about, all right, well, we'll kind of create this idea that maybe Carter Page is a Russian agent, and we'll use that to get a FISA warrant to get his communications. And then with a 2-hop rule, we can talk to anybody he talked to, listen in to anybody he talked to, as well as anybody that those people talk to. So through that 2-hop rule, we'll get to the entire Trump campaign's communications. And once we get there, surely we're going to find something. That was the strategy. Of course, there's got to be something there. Of course, we saw the text messages involving one of the key investigators, Peter Strzok, that he was having with his, at that time, lover girl, Lisa Page, remember? And he said he wasn't sure if he wanted to flip over and become involved in the Mueller investigation because of his concern that there's no big there. And that's what he said in his text message. Well, how do you think he knew that there was no big there? Because they'd already been through the communications looking for something. So this is their strategy. This is what they do. They get an investigation going, and they assume all we got to do is get something going, then we'll find the smoking gun. And once we find the smoking gun, it'll clean up all the bad acts that we did before, where we got the investigation going, even though the reality was maybe it wasn't legitimate.
And you know what's really bad is that once they get it up and get it going, it's so confusing at this point. The majority of the public out there, they absolutely do not know what's going on, because I know right after he was completely, it was closed, signed, sealed, he was impeached. I had many people calling me, texting me, and just trying to get a hold of me saying, what happened to our president?
Right.
They don't understand. And that's why Pelosi and the rest want to drag this on, because it's very important to keep that word impeached out there, because when it finally does stop, there's nothing else until they figure out, but maybe he stole Christmas or...
Right. No, you're exactly right. There's too much information. We're
right.
drowning in a sea of information. You cannot remember it all. And you know what's interesting to me?
Minutia.
Yeah, all the minutia of it. We've actually known a lot of this for a long time. Like if you saw the big news last week, the FISA court, Chief Judge Rosemary Collier, which we've heard her name before, she's actually stepping down from the court apparently due to health issues. But before she did that or announced that, on December 5th, she entered an order saying, one, she was kind of chastising the FBI in the order, but let's face it, who is being held individually accountable? I don't see anybody so far being held accountable. So you can write an order up that says, shame on you, FBI, you shouldn't have done that. You made 17 material misrepresentations and omissions in the last FISA application. Remember, 7 in the first. So you understand what that means. They were increasing the number of misrepresentations and omissions throughout the applications to keep them going. Now, why were they doing that? Because every piece of evidence that they discovered through the use of the FISA warrants was exculpatory, means it tended to show that the Trump campaign was not colluding or conspiring with the Russians and that there was no big there. That's what all the evidence was showing. So as time went on, they had to continue to make omissions. Okay, well, don't tell the FISA court about some of this stuff we found and misrepresentations. Don't tell the FISA court about who these people really are. Don't tell them that Carter Page is a longtime CIA U.S. government source, that he works with the government to try to expose Russians who are trying to spy on our country. We won't tell them that. And that's the whole Kevin Kleinsmith thing that's gotten into. And, of course, that's dealt with in the FISA order as well. But one of the things that we now know that Kevin Kleinsmith did, we know this through the IG report and other sources, we know that Kevin Kleinsmith went in and altered an email that was used to support the FISA application. And the email said, essentially, that Carter Page was a source for the CIA. And he changed it to read, was not a source for the CIA. Now, you don't get much more. That you talk about a smoking gun. That is a criminal offense, going in and altering evidence, particularly when you're talking about then using it to get a surveillance warrant on a United States citizen, Carter Page. But all attorneys, when they're practicing in front of courts, all attorneys have a duty of candor to the court, which means you have to tell the court the truth. And you can't be slick about it. Well, you're not supposed to be slick about it. Let's put it that way. You're not supposed to be slick about it. It's not supposed to be wink, wink, nod, nod. We're going to omit telling the court something and lead the court to believe something false by omission. That's a misrepresentation by omission. Well, that's exactly what Kevin Kleinsmith did in putting together that FISA application against Carter Page. That's exactly what the FBI did. That's exactly what Sally Yates did and Rod Rosenstein did and all these people did when they signed off on the verified, does that word not mean anything? On the verified application for a FISA warrant.
To say the least, a lot of these folks did not play by the rules.
They didn't play by the rules, but where's the accountability? So in this FISA court order from December 5th, Chief Judge Rosemary Collier says, one, shame on you, FBI. This calls into question a lot of your representations to the court previously, but she also said, I want to know every case, and she didn't name Kleinsmith. We just happen to know who he is, but I want to know every case that Kevin Kleinsmith worked on that was submitted to the FISA court for a warrant. We want to get a list of all of the cases. Essentially, we need to go back through and double check those cases. She also said, I want an update on whether or not he was referred to his bar association, because you see, you can and should be disbarred for making this type of a misrepresentation to a court. It's a plain, stark violation of your duty of candor to the court. There's no way that an attorney doesn't know that this is completely wrong and could cost the attorney his or her license. So that's part of the reason Kevin Kleinsmith was so upset when President Trump was elected. And I don't know if you remember those little minute details, but, he was texting back and forth with his FBI buddies about his name being all over the documents. And I cleaned that up a little bit because he had a little bit more colorful way of saying it. But that his name was all over the documents. In other words, he already knew that he's the most likely one to be scapegoated for all this. He's the one that made the changes, maybe at the direction of Peter Strzok. We don't know that, but it's fairly safe to assume that that could have been the case since he was working for Peter Strzok. And we know how Peter Strzok felt about the president, but he knew he was the one it was going to land on his head. And let's hope at least it lands on somebody's head, but maybe it ought to be James Comey.
Not going to happen.
No, not around here. It'll happen somewhere, though. It's kind of like it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. You'll find some snow
It's going to be close to 80 on Christmas Day around here.
Oh, wow. Well, get the shorts out, I guess. Have a nice day in the sun. Is it going to be sunny at least, or are we going to have more of this rain?
It's going to be pretty. A 10% chance of rain tomorrow and Christmas Day.
Good. Well, let's flip back and keep talking about some of this because, there are so many. I've got so many different directions I could go with some of this information. And I kind of thought I was going to wind up going in one direction, and frankly, we've kind of gone in a different direction. But I want to bring something else to your attention because you remember how about a week and a day ago, Jim Comey was on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. Remember that? We talked about the interview. We played some of the clips during last week's show. And, Jim Comey was kind of taking this position of, okay, you know what? Inspector General was right. I was wrong. There was real sloppiness, as he put it, in the process. That's what they want to call it when they lie to the FISA court. They want to call it real sloppiness. If you or I lied to the FISA court or lied to the FBI, that's a criminal offense. And we're going to jail for a significant amount of time for that criminal offense. But when these guys do it, the guys in charge, they just say, that's just sloppiness. And remember, Comey said, that happened 7 layers below me. I can't be, as director of an organization of 38,000 people, I can't be in charge of every little investigation. Well, when we heard that, we knew that was a complete lie as well, because the entire Russia investigation was run out of the director and deputy director's offices, out of Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe's offices. And, of course, you can see that in the text messages that we have between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Now, you know what's interesting? The only reason apparently we've even got those text messages, because Peter Strzok's wife got a hold of them. His wife, who was pretty ticked off, by the way, about the affair he was conducting with his coworker, and that's how we got those text messages released, not because, the FBI was just being forthcoming with stuff. But one of the things that happened last week is Attorney General Bill Barr gave a number of interviews, one of them with Martha McCallum, that was pretty good. And I thought it was pretty stark the way that he laid out the fact that Jim Comey was lying in that interview on Fox News on Sunday. And, all I can say, because I hear a lot of back and forth on Attorney General Barr, I'm really looking, I have a lot of respect for the man. I believe he's done a great job. I'm looking forward to what's coming, but I also am a little bit nervous just because of some of the time delay and the way this is being run out, that, are they just once again running out the clock on us? And if you remember, there were a lot of people that thought that Attorney General Jeff Sessions was secretly looking into this stuff using that U.S. attorney out of Utah, John Huber. You remember that? And they said, wait till Huber, he's running essentially a secret investigation, and this is going to blow the whole thing open. Well, what it's turned out now is that John Huber said, I can't do anything. And I think this was a cop-out, by the way. But he said, I can't do anything because the Inspector General's investigating it, which is just not true. He could have himself done an investigation, but he chose not to. Maybe it was too hot politically, and he didn't want to touch it. But now we've got Attorney General Barr in there, and he's put John Durham, the U.S. attorney out of Connecticut, in charge of the investigation. And the things that they're saying make it sound to me like something is really going to happen. And I sure hope so, because we can't have any faith in these institutions if this stuff is just covered up. I mean, the American people, I think by and large, those who are really paying attention to this, have lost faith. I know I have lost faith in the FBI and in the intelligence community for participating in this coup against our president.
Are we past the point of no return?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we've got to wait and see what happens here, but there's some noise being made that at least sounds positive. Now, let's listen to what Attorney General Barr had to say about Jim Comey's statements on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace.
He said, I was 7 steps removed from what was going on. The director doesn't get involved in these kinds of things, the actual investigation. Do you believe that?
No. I think that one of the problems with what happened was precisely that they pulled the investigation up to the executive floors, and it was run and bird-dogged by a very small group of very high-level officials. And the idea that this was 7 layers below him is simply not true.
Well, okay, there you have it. Now, we already knew that was the case, but it's amazing. You see, the media doesn't call, Chris Wallace didn't call Jim Comey on that. He wasn't ready to go with some of the information that showed that the investigation was being run out of the director and the deputy director's offices. He wasn't ready to go, for instance, with the text message between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page saying that the White House, which would be President Obama at that time, wants to be kept fully informed of everything we're doing. Now, who do you think goes up to brief the president? You think they send a low-level person, or does the director go and brief the president? Well, I'll tell you if you're not sure. It's the director. So Jim Comey knew exactly what was going on, and he was briefing President Obama on what was going on, and the people running the investigation knew about that. And yet the media doesn't report on any of this. And, of course, there is an effort to try and protect and cover for President Obama. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens. I mean, the truth of the matter is that you and I, any of us, we just don't have any power in this situation. So we've got to cross our fingers and hope against hope that this really is going to happen, that John Durham really is investigating all this. And by the way, he apparently is asking for the emails, call logs, and other documents from the CIA relating to John Brennan's role in this whole thing, because John Brennan is one of the central players, along with Jim Comey and James Clapper. They were the 3 that were running this operation. And, of course, if you listen to James Clapper, he'll point the finger at the president very quickly. He says it's hard for him to believe he could get in trouble for something that he was directed to do by the White House, right, as the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. So you had the head of all of our intelligence agencies, the head of our CIA, John Brennan, and the head of our FBI, Jim Comey. You had all 3 of them working in concert under the direction of the president to conduct this investigation into Donald Trump, try to find something, some smoking gun that they could hang their hat on, some way to slander the president and the president-elect. And, of course, eventually, during his presidency, they then continued that investigation through the auspices of Bob Mueller and his investigation. Now, one of the things that kind of does disturb me about William Barr's statements is that he says there's no question Russia hacked our election. And we've heard that said over and over and over again. And remember, a lie told often enough becomes the truth. And that's what we're dealing with here, folks. It's hard to keep up with all the minutia and all the details. And there's a lot of stuff you probably don't even remember about this stuff. But the truth of the matter is that Russia did not hack the DNC servers, did not get the emails. That was most likely an inside job. And
okay, they didn't do it then, but they're really going to do it this November.
Exactly. Well, somebody who actually is in a position to know is William Benny. And we don't have time to cover all his biography, but he was probably one of the most decorated analysts in the history of the NSA. He created the Stellar Wind program that was used to spy on people all around the world, but not American citizens. And then after September 11th, 2001, the government made the decision to turn the Stellar Wind program on to the United States and on to U.S. citizens, and he resigned in protest and was a whistleblower, but didn't go public in the way that we see the quote-unquote whistleblowers now. He just resigned in protest and stated his objections. But let's listen just to a little bit of what he had to say about the Russian hacking, because he's really analyzed the data, and all appearances are that it was an inside job, i.e. that Seth Rich, well, I just lost, that's the problem with these. Let's see if I can get it back here, my place that I was trying to get to.
Suggesting the Russians made the hack. Well, we found the same 5 items published by WikiLeaks in the Podesta emails. And those items do not have the Russian fingerprints, which directly implies that Guccifer 2 was inserting these into the files to make it look like the Russians did this hack. And it's very, and taking that into account with all the other evidence we had, like the download speeds from Guccifer 2 were too fast, and they couldn't be managed by the web, and that the files he was putting together and saying that he actually hacked were in fact the 2 files he said he had were really one file, and that he was playing with the data, moving it into 2 different files to claim two hacks. So taking that into account with the fabrication of the Russian fingerprints, it leads us back to inferring that, in fact, the Marble framework out of the Vault 7 compromise of CIA hacking routines was a possible user of in this case.
So if you get what he's saying there, if you remember the Vault 7 release, it came out that the CIA had hacking technology that they could use to make it look like the Russians had done a hack, when in fact it was the CIA that had done the hack. And so what he's saying there is, I mean, if you're, and again, the details, I'm sorry, folks, there's so many details, it's hard to stay on top of it. But if you remember Guccifer and then Guccifer 2.0, Guccifer was a real guy. Guccifer 2.0, we don't really know who that was, but it's alleged to be the way that the Russians released the emails that they hacked from the DNC. And what William Benny is establishing there is that the reality was, because those documents are found other places and don't have the same fingerprints on them, the reality is that Guccifer 2.0 is probably a CIA job.
My head is spinning.
Isn't it? Well, all this was about creating a narrative, pushing it out there, and having enough evidence to support it so that people couldn't shoot it down completely. And, I mean, that is really, really sad. I had some other stuff I was going to try to get to. We're running out of time here. We can't really get to it. But I was going to play that clip for you when Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, was testifying in Congress, and Gerald Nadler was asking him, and he testified. You remember that story about the Russian troll farms? They helped to hack our election. They put out memes that confused the American people and turned them against each other. You remember all that nonsense? Well, then it comes out that they spent in total less than $5,000 on the Google platform putting those ads out. Now, if they were able to spend $5,000 and affect the election, I mean, what about the $1 billion that Hillary Clinton had in her war chest? She needs to get some new advisors on how to spend that money, I guess. When we come back, we'll go out there and tell you about some A couple of interesting stories involving Lyme disease. I'm just laughing, Pat George, because when I said get the Bing Crosby White Christmas, I didn't mean play the same song. I meant do the White Christmas album, with Mele Kalinke. I forgot to pop in and tell you that.
The album. I only thought you liked that. That was okay. That's why I tried to play some other artists like Michael Bublé. And I said,
we love this one song. Let's just keep it going at this point, right? Might as well. Well, that'd be one thing we won't have around here in the Bay Area is a white Christmas. You said it's going to be 80 degrees on Christmas Day. That's shorts weather, folks. That's going to be something else. Well, I got a couple of stories before we jump into the Lyme story, which is a fascinating story, really. We talked about that some last week, and we just didn't get to it. But before I do jump into that, I've got one that's very appropriate at this time of year, and that is, there may be a little bit of trouble with Santa finding his way back to the North Pole this Christmas, because I don't know if you've heard this, but the North Pole is on the move. And it has been on the move for quite a while now. And there's the idea that this could be part of a bigger change that happens every few 100,000 years, which is a shift of the magnetic poles to
reverse.
Where they reverse. North becomes south and south becomes north. Now, we don't know for sure if that's what's happening right now, but the move is significant enough and it's accelerating that it's starting to affect things like GPS, the way that airlines navigate through the world. Also, it's affecting animals that migrate, like birds, butterflies, and whales. They all use the magnetic poles for direction. So what I wanted to share with you is, number one, the magnetic pole is moving and it's accelerating. Back in the year 2000, the movement was measured and it was moving about 6.2 miles a year. Well, you want to know how fast it's moving now in 2019? 31 miles per year, so about 5 times the speed. It's accelerated to 5 times.
That's fast.
It's really moving. And where's it going, Pat George? Right now, it's rocketing towards Russia. So now you got Russia. Not only are they stealing our elections, they're stealing the North Pole. They're stealing the North Pole. And I say that jokingly. Hopefully nobody out there
Well, at least Santa Claus is already in a red outfit.
That's right. I mean, give me a break. He's got a beard like Karl Marx. I mean, it's all coming together now for us. Finally, we understand what Santa Claus is really all about. But in all seriousness, folks, this is something very interesting. We don't know what it pretends. Some people say it's part of the beginning of the pole shift. Now, if that happens, what comes from it, we don't know. We'll find out. It's kind of like, if you remember Y2K, some people say it's going to be absolute disaster. Other people say, well, what's the big deal if the poles shift? It won't be a big deal. It's not like the Earth's going to flip upside down or something like that. And even if it did, would that really matter? I guess we would get off one season, but that might be it. Anyway, all right, let's talk about Lyme disease because, a listener sent me a book, which I thought was fascinating, and that's a book called Bitten. And the subtitle was The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. I'd recommend, if you're interested in this, that you go out there and get the book. It's a fascinating book. Now, it doesn't make any final conclusions as to what Lyme disease actually is, but it does a little bit more than just suggest that Lyme disease may have actually been part of a secret U.S. biological warfare program and actually wound up being released into the United States as part of that program. And again, it's not clear whether it was accidental or a purposeful release, but it goes into detail about how you might want to use a biological weapon that doesn't necessarily kill the civilian population, because that would be a war crime, right, but somehow disables them. So there, and I don't know if you know this, but there are 400,000 people a year who are afflicted with Lyme disease. And a lot of doctors and medical professionals for a long time didn't even consider Lyme disease to be a legitimate disease because it's so hard to nail down exactly where it's coming from. Well, the person who discovered the microbe that supposedly creates Lyme, and what the book gets into is it may actually be several microbes at once create the symptoms of Lyme disease. But the person who discovered it is a person named Willy Bergdorfer, who's a Swiss tick scientist, and he started in the early 1950s in the U.S. Biological Warfare Program, working strictly with ticks as a delivery vehicle for these kind of biological warfare diseases. He discovered what's called a spirochete bacteria. It's called Borrelia burgdorferi. It's named after him. That supposedly creates Lyme disease. Now, a spirochete is like a corkscrew-shaped bacteria that can drill into your various tissues and is very hard to get rid of. It's the same kind of bacteria, spirochete that is, as syphilis, for example. So there are these diseases out there that come from spirochete bacteria, but there are other bacteria and organisms, microorganisms involved, including many from the Rickettsia genus, including Rickettsia helvetica, which is called the Swiss agent. And interestingly, Willy Bergdorfer was from Switzerland and traveled back there as part of his research and work with these biological agents. But he worked based out of the Rocky Mountain Laboratory in the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana throughout the 50s and 60s, and it's really a fascinating book. There's so much detail, I can't really summarize it well. I could just tell you that obviously the U.S. government was working on a number of biological weapons delivered through ticks and included using things like the Swiss agent. That was part of their research. I mean, he wrote papers on it. He delivered addresses on it. And this idea of spreading diseases through ticks, they were testing it. They were just randomly dumping ticks different places. In fact, the book tells a story about how the CIA airline, if you've ever heard of it, called Air America, that was active in that time frame. Back in 1962, there was a guy on a plane for Air America and was basically given a couple of cardboard boxes and told to fly low over a part of Cuba, open up the cardboard boxes and dump them out. And, of course, when he opened them, they were absolutely crawling with thousands and tens of thousands of ticks.
Very interesting book.
Yeah. Well, you read it too, didn't you?
I loved it.
I loaned it to you as well. And so you got to read it. And it was, it's fascinating that we would do this and that we would just sort of try these things out on our own population, the innocent populations of other countries. And if you know anything, well, thank you, Melikaliki Maka. That's one of my favorites. If you know anything about Lyme disease and the symptoms of it, it's a terrible disease. It's debilitating, gets a brain fog, get a lot of pain in your joints. It is a completely debilitating disease for some people, and including the author of the book, Chris Newby. That's how she got into this study, was she actually contracted Lyme disease when she was up enjoying the beach one day with her family on Long Island, and her husband picked up a tick, got bitten, and couldn't get properly diagnosed or figure out how to deal with it, which they eventually did, but that caused her to look into it. Very interesting book, Bitten. Folks, I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.